where over 450 people have been killed as Israel and Palestine are locked in a fresh conflict. Hamas, which controls the Gaza Strip, launched a multi-pronged attack on Israel early on Saturday, with thousands of rockets raining down on Israeli cities. Well, hundreds of Palestinian infiltrators also swarmed into Israeli territory as Israel declared a state of war. Israel retaliated with air raids that tore through the Gaza Strip, razing buildings to rubble. Black smoke and orange flames billowed into the sky as crowds of mourners carried the dead bodies through the streets. Hamas also launched a fresh barrage of 150 rockets towards Tel Aviv late last night. Hamas said that the group was holding a big number of Israeli captives, including senior officials. Reports quoting Hamas officials say that the group had enough captives to make Israel free all Palestinians in its jail. Now, Gaza's dead and wounded were carried into crumbling and overcrowded hospitals with severe shortages of medical supplies and equipment. Streets were empty apart from ambulances racing to the scenes of airstrikes. Israel has cut the power, plunging the city into darkness. Now, India and countries of the West, including the United States, denounced the Palestinian attack and pledged support for Israel. And issuing a blunt warning, the U.S. president, in an impromptu speech, said that Israel had the right to defend itself. Israel and Hezbollah, meanwhile, they've expressed support for Hamas. Across West Asia, there were demonstrations in support of the militant group, with Israeli and U.S. flags set on fire, in marches waving Palestinian flags in Iraq, Lebanon, Syria and Yemen. The escalation comes against a backdrop of surging violence between Israel and Palestinian militants in the West Bank. That is where a Palestinian Authority exercises limited self-rule. Meanwhile, Washington has been trying to strike a deal that would normalize ties between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Now, this is being seen by Israelis as the biggest prize yet in their decades-long fight for Arab recognition. The latest escalation and violence may adversely affect the deal. And for more on this, we're now being joined by Colonel Rich Outzen, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council and the Jamestown Foundation. Thank you very much for joining us on WION, Mr. Outzen.
Good to be with you.
Right, Mr. Outzen, these unprecedented times, Israel has declared a state of war and has launched Operation Iron Swords. It has also launched retaliatory airstrikes. What can we expect in the next few hours?
Well, I think maybe we should think not in hours, but in days, because the scope of the response here is going to unfold in a significant way, given the historic nature of the attacks. I think President Netanyahu Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel said that the immediate response is to end the violations of Israeli territory by Hamas fighters, and they still have some portions of Israeli territory that are occupied by the Hamas fighters in several of the Israeli towns that are near the Gaza border. So in the coming hours, what we'll see is a continued response via airstrikes on Gaza, and also trying to end the occupation or the attacks rather by the Hamas and related groups in Gaza. The bigger question is what happens in the days and hours, days and weeks rather to follow, because I think what we're looking at here is historic in nature. The Israelis are talking about perhaps a major ground operation to end the threat to the Israeli communities, and that would be something that we haven't seen in several decades.
Absolutely, Mr. Outson. A Palestinian Authority president on a call with Blinken just a few hours ago said that injustice towards Palestinians is driving the conflict to explosion.
Yeah, well, look, there's a couple ways to look at this. I am very sympathetic, having lived in Israel and worked with both Israelis and Palestinians for several years. I am very sympathetic to the plight of the Palestinians. There's no doubt that for the Palestinians of Gaza and in the West Bank, it's a very difficult situation. But as we've seen, there's very difficult or different ways to deal with this challenge politically for the Palestinians. And one is the political path laid out by Mahmoud Abbas and others that have tried to deal with a peace deal with Israel. It hasn't been going great, hasn't been going fast, but given Western support for Israel and Israel's own security concerns, that is the long and the hard path. And then there's the path laid out by Iran and sort of militant Islamic groups that says let's kill Israeli civilians as a tool to try to get what we want, and that's what's been evidenced by today's activities. I certainly don't support that, and I don't think it's going to ever work. I think that the path to terror is not going to work for the Palestinian people. So, yeah, the Palestinian suffering is real, but increasing Israeli suffering is not going to be the thing that ends that. It's going to be an enhanced mutual conversation based on shared interests and shared mutual understanding. This is a step back from that, unfortunately.
Right, Colonel Outson, please stay with us. We'll be coming back in a short while from now. And the very moment when Hamas launched the massive attack on Israel, the situation was doomed to escalate and spiral out of the control. Over 450 people have already been killed in Hamas's attack and Israeli retaliation till now. That's the figure, 450 people. Common people caught in the crossfire are suffering the worst. In the next few minutes, we take a look at the lives of common people on both the sides. The situation on the ground is very disturbing, and we advise viewer discretion for this report. Now, these are moments when heavily Hamas militants barged into Israeli settlements in southern Israel. They were hunting for common residents for taking hostages. The hostages will be used for later bargains. Another video from inside Gaza also surfaced, where an injured lady was being held in Gaza city as militants take Israeli hostages. Multiple videos emerged showing multiple bodies and bullet-scarred vehicles as if Hamas's gunmen were still fighting the Israeli troops. The bodies of Israeli civilians also laid strewn across the highway, surrounded by broken glass.
We saw that our forces were already outside. My friend left from above. I couldn't move. I guess I have something in my back from the stress because I sat for 2.5 hours on the slope without moving. My legs were folded, so no, it's a bit hard for me to stand up and walk. And then she left and was immediately taken by a car. And then I left from the other side and soldiers took us to the buses. There's no one like the IDF.
Hospitals and other medical centers were overcrowded on both the sides as thousands of injured were rushed to get medical help. The Hamas attack on Israel comes as the biggest in decades. Bodies have started piling up on both the sides as the conflict rages. The dead are being carried for burial on both the sides, even as bombings tore apart towns and cities. And we have with us Colonel Outson back with us. Thanks for staying with us, Colonel. I cannot not describe the impact of the war on the common people on both the sides.
Yes, unfortunately, the way Israel and Gaza and frankly the Israelis and the Palestinians more generally are situated is that the civilian communities are very close to where the tensions between the fighting forces are located. So what you have is that civilians are at great risk on either side. Now, obviously, as an American and someone who's worked with the Israeli forces, my first sympathies here are to view this as a horrible terror attack against the people of Israel. But it's not just the Israeli civilians that are at risk, it's the Palestinians as well. And we've got explosives and drones and artillery and all sorts of very heavy weapons being used on both sides here. So it's a tragedy. It's a human tragedy from both sides. At the end of the day, I think that what we're facing here is a failure of diplomacy, a failure of policy, a failure of intelligence to see where this was all headed. And it's a great tragedy. There are no two ways about it.
Absolutely, Colonel. Now, just coming to that if you see this as a colossal failure of intelligence from Israel's side, and the reports also suggesting that the U.S. is mulling sharing intelligence with Israel after the latest attack.
Well, the United States is bound to Israel through many ties of economy and diplomacy and culture and so forth. And there's no doubt that the United States will continue to support Israel and Israel's security. And that said, this has been a very unique time in the region because the U.S. has also been, under the Biden administration, reaching out to Iran, which is very closely tied to Hamas, which led the attacks today out of Gaza. So at the same time that the United States is trying to support Israel, its historical and traditional ally, the current administration in the United States has been empowering Iran by loosening sanctions and flowing all sorts of sort of monetary support to the regime in Tehran. So these two things are not really reconcilable, and that's one of the reasons for what we saw happening today. I think that it was a colossal intelligence failure on the part of the Israelis. Not only did they not know the timing of the attack, but I think the nature of the attack. I don't think Israel realized the sorts of things that Hamas was capable of doing. It was an attack conducted by air through gliders and rockets, through sea with some landings from boats, and by ground with attacks from tunnels and so forth. Unprecedented in terms of what Hamas has been able to do. It was a horrible attack in the fact that it was terrorism focused on killing civilians, and you've probably seen the videos of women and children, and nobody can watch this sort of an attack and feel anything but horror at what's done. But at the same time, we should feel that there was a massive and colossal intelligence and policy failure.
Absolutely, Colonel Outson. These are unprecedented times, and we'll be tracking this very closely here on WION. But thanks very much for taking our time and sharing insights with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.